Welcome back. You're at Newsroom on SABC News. Now, the recent case of alleged assault by Deputy Higher Education Minister Mduduzi Manana has once again shone the spotlight, of course, on the behaviour of public officials and public servants. Earlier this year, former Minister for Public Service and Administration told public servants that they must comply with the Public Service Code of Conduct and the Provisions Charter. His remarks followed a heated public debate involving a government spokesperson who made waves on social media when defending a minister who was being accused of being under the influence while addressing a public gathering. Now, to discuss the ethics and the conduct of public servants a little bit further, well, we are joined in studio by Lebohang Pheko, who's a political economist. Very good morning to you. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
How should high-ranking government officials and public servants, for that matter, behave in the public space?
Yeah, so I mean, I think there are a few things. The one is what ethical leadership means, and it always is assumed that it's to do with a sense of justice, a sense of compassion, a sense of servanthood. But the most important thing as well is a sense of being exemplary, that there's some kind of a conduct which is consistent to their private lives and their own conduct, moral, their own, private moral universe.
Yeah.
And I think the important thing as well is that there's a normative idea of certain levels of behavior that we all socially think are acceptable. Yeah. So beating people up in car parks probably falls a bit out of that realm.
Well, short, one would think. Do we have enough of this kind of exemplary leadership that you talk about here in South Africa, or do we have too many patchy periods?
So the interesting thing is that in many countries, a public official who's found in some way to be lacking, have failed in the public domain, or even where their private life has been found to be somehow controversial, would normally instinctively resign. And what we find in South Africa is that more and more there's an attempt to justify, we go into rescue mode, so we want to rescue a person rather than holding them to account in a particular way. We either want to apologize on their behalf, or we want to assume that it's not important enough, it will blow over. And of course, the common default is for somebody to say they are sorry on a public platform and assume that this somehow nullifies the wrongdoing that they have done.
Yeah, there's a lot of criticism for apology this week, mind you. I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. But let's talk about that incident quickly, because there's a lot of that happened. Of course, there was the incident itself that's on film, and some of the eyewitness accounts are even more harrowing than what we see on the video. Then there's the issue around the apology that you mentioned. But then the behavior of the police ministry afterwards. This person wasn't arrested. This person went straight to court, some people say, and of course they call it preferential all over social media. Just give me your overview on all these little markers along the way.
Bits and bobs. I think that there's a few things. I mean, there's sort of the red carpeting of public individuals is problematic, because it gives the impression that some are more equal than others, and that some are somehow should be cushioned from the consequences, however harsh this public critique that might come with it, and also even the career consequences that come with this sort of behavior. And I think that if we're trying to build some sort of an ethical universe that is commonly agreed upon by by people across this country and even globally, it has been understanding that all of us are subject to a certain code of conduct, which all of us should be subjected to, no matter what the cost of that.
Do we understand ethics, though?
Yeah, so ethics is really to do with, the philosophy, moral philosophy. And when we speak about, ethics in the realm of political relations, it's a form of leadership which then implies that we are able to mediate social relations. So there's process ethics in terms of elections, in terms of how we spend money, in terms of public services accountability, service delivery. That's all part of ethics. There's the ethics of people, how people behave even in the workplace. So any public official, whether it's somebody who works at the post office, whether it is a doctor or a nurse at a government clinic, whether it's somebody at SARS or whatever, we expect them to behave in a particular way. But there's also the other form of ethics, which is the social interaction. And the two go together quite importantly, because if you don't have a sense of ethical leadership in relation to expenditure,
Yeah.
in relation to overspending,
Yeah.
in relation to, you know, imposing your blue car cavalcade on the freeway because you didn't leave your meeting on time. I mean, that sort of sense of entitlement and the sense that, you know, you're subject to a different kind of accountability than other citizens. I think it makes it very difficult to take any form of high ground in terms of pronouncements. Now, important example, Tony Engeni at some point got into some sticky business in terms of, you know, corruption charges, spent a few days or weeks in jail.
The Mercedes-Benz incident.
Yes, exactly. The ML4, the, you know, et cetera, and he then is recycled a few years later as the head of, as you know, part of the ANC ethics committee. And one just, it just boggles slightly, then where is the moral standing? And I think we've been seeing too many of these sorts of glitches and non-linear behavior within the ANC and across party lines, by the way.
You talked about abuse of power a little bit earlier, and I spoke to members of the VIP protection unit anonymously, and some of them, of course, have to carry shopping bags and all sorts of abuses of power that you
collect laundry, dry cleaning, etc.
All of the above. How do you change this kind of entitlement that you're talking about, or is it a scenario that we just have to deal with as the politics of the now? Yeah,
I think there's, you know, nobody's expecting anybody to walk on water. But I do think that these things can be well documented. I mean, there are codes of conduct which people can sign off on. And where there's a breach of that code of conduct, particularly in a very visible, public, visceral way, there should be particular sanctions which are immediately. In many countries, for example, an MP or a public official will be asked to refund money if it's been ill spent. An MP will be asked to compensate an employee if, for example, they are treated badly, and they'll be asked to pay them the overtime. And for example, in this instance, you know, we're led to believe that VIP special protection are out protecting somebody in their private time when they're at a nightclub. That's not state business. So a person might be asked to compensate them out of their own pocket for that, if they need that, or to hire their own, you know, after hours personnel. And I think there's just a lack of that. And I think that because we don't have something that's written, well, I think we do have something that's written down, but it isn't really followed. It gives rise to these very fluid and very relaxed and lax and very entitled behaviors.
Is it okay for a minister, a leader of, especially in a education minister, to be out in nightclubs at 4 in the morning?
Look, I think adults will do what adults do. I think what's problematic for me is the conduct around that. And I think the other thing is the horrible lack of judgment. The other thing that's quite interesting is that it's interesting that he's part of the Ministry of Education, higher education. And, you know, the question of bullying in schools, bullying in institutions of higher education, campus rape, etc.,
gender issues in general.
You know, the whole thing of, you know, fees must fall, etc. You expect that a person of that level, if you're a bully in your private life, it's difficult to understand that how you're going to be able to, with any real conviction, because that's the other thing, is that if you as a leader, you don't believe inherently in the value system of the policies that you're rolling out, why should you be there?
Sanctions. I spoke to the ethics committee a little bit earlier, and it felt a little bit soft.
What was the response?
It felt a little bit more as if guidance is given instead of sanctions. Is it not that sanctions should be given instead of guidance, maybe a little bit more?
This goes back to your previous question. We can't have a discretionary approach to this. It's an approach that must be a zero tolerance on certain things. So if somebody steals, if somebody's abusive, if somebody abuses their staff, etc., etc. If somebody is involved in the kind of disgraceful fracas of this past week, there should be kind of, the one thing is the zero tolerance. The second thing is the consistency and the speed, because this is not just about those people. It's also about the public confidence in state organs, public confidence in public officials, and the notion that they serve us and we need to have faith in them. And if we no longer have faith in them, there has to be an illustration that the state and the party in this instance, or the government, has an appreciation that they're here at the behest of us, we the people.
It's almost, I get a sense that in South Africa, we are being told that the public is more accepting of, I wouldn't call it unethical behavior, but yeah, along those lines. Elsewhere in the world, in the UK, for instance, if an MP is found to watch pornography on his phone, he has to step down immediately. In South Africa, if you get nude pictures on your phone, or if you, all sorts of stuff like this, all you have to do is just say sorry.
If that, in some cases, request more pictures, and if that. I mean, nothing. There's no particular sanction, and I think that it goes back again to the idea of leadership as as being exemplary. Yeah, a point, and I think there's an old struggle tradition which says that the personal is political, and there's some schools of thought which would say that a person who lacks self-mastery in their private life, in their private conduct.
Yes.
A person who abuses their spouse, who neglects their children, who kicks dogs, who's mean to their helper, who doesn't pay the people who work for them, who abuses them in any way. There's a feeling that this illustrates some kind of moral paucity, some kind of impoverishment, and some dissonance between what they are pronouncing. I mean, when we speak about Batupele, a better life for all, I mean, if it's a better life for all, then surely then we need to see that you begin with your own private conduct in being a person who is led by a particular ethical guideline.
We talk about moral regeneration quite a lot in South Africa, and we talk about, of course, how this ties into things like social cohesion and all the programs that we run around gender violence and the like, and none of these things seem to be working because the numbers show that. Is it because of leadership? And is it that simple?
It sometimes is and it sometimes isn't. I think the one thing is that we haven't necessarily populated moral regeneration with the sort of collective understanding that we need. At one point, President Zuma was the head of the moral regeneration movement or council in this country. And I think that at that particular moment, the symbolism of him as the head of it, when he was still the deputy president and before his own ongoing legal woes began, the symbolism of that was not wasted. And I think there was a point at which it was felt that really he did not signify the kind of moral fortitude, even the perception of wrongdoing, made him, rendered his word in this really problematic. And I think that we've become so relaxed that even the perception of wrongdoing is seen to be something that can be treated with discretion, something that can be explained away, something that can be excused, rather than being something where there's a particular guideline and there's an agreed format of public behavior, which we all expect of each other. I mean, as you would expect of me, I would expect of you, would expect of each other. I mean, you'd expect from the person at Pick and Pay to, to present themselves in a particular way. If somebody at Pick and Pay were rude to you, you go to the manager, they get a sanction, you have a conversation, and oftentimes, I mean, I've gotten a phone call once or twice from the person, from the rude checkout person to say, I'm really sorry about that, I must apologize. Whereas with our public politics at the moment in this country, we don't get that. You get a kind of a grandstanding, a grandstanding apology, often to some, facing a camera, not even to addressed to the person. And it goes across the board. I mean, remember the whole question of the University of Free State where there were those young students who then urinated on these women's, etc. And at the time, there was a criticism of the then leader of the institution who accepted an apology from these boys,
it was an outcry,
which had not been presented properly to the women involved. And I think that's a microcosm of the way in which we practice rescue politics. It's like, oh, there, he was having a bad day, he was drunk, oh, tisk, tisk, and then that's it.
It's not just one end of the political spectrum, though. It goes across it, and therein lies, I think, the conundrum we have to deal with as a country. Of course, we know the tweets around colonialism and what followed after that, and all these kinds of things. Collectively, what is the way forward for us as South Africa?
Oh, gosh, I think that as citizens and as people who in the public domain, we need to continue to use these platforms to really make different demands and to demand better than what we're getting. I think that the Twitter campaigns and the Twitter movement has actually been helpful because it's a very immediate way of voicing discontent, and it's become a way more and more of issues, number one, being distributed really quickly, and number two, of people voicing their discontent. Isn't
that the death of real activism, though?
Look, I have argued that in some respects, but I also think that Twittervism should not be, Twittervism should not be entirely disqualified as a form of action. But it certainly cannot. We can't leave it to our thumbs.
It should be one element of activism only.
We can't leave it just to our thumbs.
I'm very glad to hear that from you, because I have a real issue with what I call slacktivism on social media. Nowadays, you put up a picture and you say, I support the hungry, and that's it. We have to move past all of that. But we're running a poll, and I just want to show you the numbers before you go. Of course, in this specific case, if we can just take off that super, there we go, guys. You see, these are the numbers. Now, of course, we ask the question every day. We run a poll. Did the Deputy Minister of Higher Education get preferential treatment? Now, of course, 82% are saying yes, and of nearly 550 votes. So it gives a fair idea of how South Africans are thinking, what the sentiment is out there. Before we take a couple of tweets, I just want to talk about this. I want you to talk about it a little bit, because if I go out here and I slap somebody, and surely I must get arrested and then go to court. And the minister in this case didn't happen. That's the kind of messages that we should not be sending to the public, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, there was a whole sort of quasi explanation around the vote of no confidence. He was needed in Parliament, etc., etc. But I think that there's no getting away from. He is not the first to experience this seeming red carpet. The red carpet ovation on his way into a legal process, and this in itself indicates that our legal processes are not even-handed, and that power and political power seems to play its hand over and above what basic processes should kick in.
Guys, let's have a look at those tweets. What are our viewers telling us? The Cool Hand tweeter says, even a blind fool can see that these so-called politicians are treated differently when it comes to the law. And this really is a sentiment that I think we should be concerned about, because it is a very prevalent sentiment out there, isn't it?
Well, I mean, also the way, the celebritization of bad behavior. So, I mean, I think Deputy Minister Manana is the latest. I mean, I think I mean, it can go back to Tony Yengen, it can go back to a lot of other public officials who seem to have been given given massages on their way into their processes. You
touched, you should be treated like any other criminal, full stop. I think that's a sentiment that people share. But you touched on the celebritization matter, and of course the world's become obsessed with celebrities, but are our politicians starting to behave like celebrities and starting to think that they are celebrities a little bit?
I think it's a global phenomenon. I think that the power comes with a certain loss of perception of your relationship with the world around you, and with your relationship with accountability. And I think I'd be interested in this instance to see the extent to which party political accountability is able to take public sentiment into account and understand and appreciate that this is not seen as popularly acceptable. You know, this is not seen as popularly, this is not popular. This is going against everybody's ethical framing of how we should behave towards each other and respect each other accordingly.
We're also asking you the question, of course, that we put up, and you guys have been tweeting us. Let's take a look at some of the tweets. The question we're asking about the behavior. Should behavior of office bearers be beyond reproach? Actually, should members of Parliament be held to a higher ethical standard than us ordinary citizens? Now, I would say, of course there should be. I mean, that's the reason why you are leading us. Rich Dad Poor Kid says, lawmakers are human beings. They must club like all of us, but they must not assault women when they are drunk. Interesting. When leadership becomes a little bit younger, does that make more sense?
What do you mean?
In South Africa, we are asking for younger people to be leaders.
Yeah, I understand. I get you now. Look, I think that people's private lives is theirs. I must say, I think I'm very wary of policing people, because that's then asking them to walk on water. But I do think that when your private life and your private conduct spills over, like as I said before, if you're beating your wife, if you're neglecting your children, if you're clubbing and you're getting you're losing control and beating people up in the car park. If it spills over into your public conduct and your public profile, certainly there's a problem. Yep,
unethical behavior is unethical behavior. Lebohang Pheko is a political economist, and today gave us the total juice on what you should and should not be doing if you were a leader here in South Africa. Yeah, elsewhere in the world, it's a little bit tougher than it is here. We're going to take a short break. When we come back, Kendall Mahamata will give you a wrap as we get into what will be another busy sporting weekend.